Happy to be here this morning in Bemidji. We've had a great trip so far. Looking forward to spending a little more time over the next couple of days in Bemidji, depending on how you feel about which team should win. But it should be fun to watch the Gophers play the Beavers tonight and tomorrow night, and excited about that as well. So, just a way of background, give you a little bit of history of who I am and why I'm here. Prior to this, the last 6.5 years, I was the Economic Development Director for the city of Albert Lea. We're down along the Iowa border there, town of about 18,000 people. That's my hometown. I still run a Goodyear tire store there, and we do have a partnership discount. So in the next 2 weeks, if you mention this meeting, you'll get everything you've got coming to you, and maybe a good deal on some tires. So you're always welcome in Albert Lea. Prior to that, I served 8 years in the legislature. That was a very educational process. I was very blessed to have that opportunity to serve, and very happy to get out too. It was one of those things that can be very frustrating, and I just don't think people should stay there forever. And I was happy to put in the 8 years and go back home, and wasn't sure what I was going to do. I still got my tire store, but I still care a lot about Greater Minnesota in general, and particularly economic development. These were the things that motivated me to run originally, and still I'm concerned about today. And attended the meeting before this, and there was discussion of a lot of things that resonate throughout the state, not just here, but also in Albert Lea, where I'm from. How do we, create better employees for manufacturers? How do we find them? How do we get kids to understand that there's good jobs out there in that? And we think we've got some ideas that are going to help that. And we think the key to that is better organizing. Better organizing Greater Minnesota in order to see a more equal distribution of resources from the state and policies that will work for Greater Minnesota. And sometimes they're different. Sometimes the metropolitan area needs a policy that is different than what we need. And so we need to have that flexibility. I think for the most part, throughout the state, the economy is improving, things are getting better, and I think there's a lot of excitement out there, and a lot of people saying, how do we capture that? What do we need to do so that, in the last week we talked about the Shutterfly expansion that is going to happen in Shakopee, that's going to come up in the presentation. What do we need to do so that an expansion like that could happen in Greater Minnesota? As I said, the economy is changing. One thing that we're concerned about is broadband, for example. As the economy changes, yet in Greater Minnesota, our broadband coverage is about half of what it is in the metropolitan area. If we don't figure out a way to get better broadband coverage in Greater Minnesota, we're going to leave ourselves behind. And it's up to us. It's up to us to organize, do a better job. We need to make sure that Greater Minnesota is competitive, not just with South Dakota, but also South Korea. And I think working together we'll be able to do that. So with that, we'll get into the presentation. We do want your input as well. That's why we're here. We think we've got some ideas. We're kind of, as we travel the state, adding more, subtracting, depending on what we're hearing. And so with that, we'll kick off. Kind of broad areas to think about is what are the barriers to making Greater Minnesota stronger? Infrastructure, that could be roads, bridges, highways, or broadband, access to capital, workforce development, tax policy, regulatory policy. Those are the types of things that we'll be thinking about. You may be asking, why did I get invited to this meeting? Why am I here? Well, you're here, one, we want to get your input and feedback about economic growth in your region. What are you doing now that really works that we could steal and use in other places? Are there state policy changes that would make a difference and help you grow your economy? And of course, to ask you to join the partnership and unite to give Greater Minnesota a unified, effective voice. So what are we going to do? Well, we're out today. We're trying to set our legislative agenda for the 2014 legislative session, which is the non-budget year. But we do plan on introducing and having at least a hearing or two on what our long-term vision is for Greater Minnesota. What's our 20-year plan? What are we going to need to do? What tools do we need to have in place in order to be successful in the future? So who is the partnership? Well, we think in order to be successful, this can't just be, and by way of history, I should say that this group started, the history of this is there's an organization called the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. There's a board member or two in the room. Bemidji has been an active member in that for many years. There's about 90 cities throughout Minnesota that are member cities. And we've been hearing from those cities over the last several years that, hey, we need you to get more involved in economic development. And the coalition has always done economic development more from a municipal perspective, things like the infrastructure program, but also active in taxation issues, annexation. But we thought in order to really be successful here, to have the impact that we want to have in St. Paul, it can't just be a group of cities. We need a broader group. We need to incorporate chambers of commerce, EDAs, the regional development commissions, private businesses, the foundations, and of course cities, all working together to make to grow Greater Minnesota's economy. So why have it? Why do we want this partnership developed for Greater Minnesota? Well, we need better policy. We need better state policy. How do you get better state policy? You've got the 201 legislators and the governor. They set the policy, they allocate resources, and I'm sure Senator Saxon can tell you there's no shortage of good ideas. The difficult thing is to try to figure out which good ideas we're going to fund, which ideas float to the top. Part of that floating to the top is strong advocacy from organized groups. That does make a difference when you're in trying to accomplish something in St. Paul. So we believe we need a stronger advocacy group supported by the public so the legislature passes good economic policies and allocates resources fairly between the metropolitan area and Greater Minnesota. So why have a partnership? There is in St. Peter, Minnesota, there's a Center for Rural Policy and Development. They study a lot of different things. One of their studies they came out with a couple months ago was who speaks for Greater Minnesota? Who is that voice? And what the study came up with was really no one, that we're fractured, we're unified, and one of the concerns that is highlighted, I think the quote is there, the widely held perception is that rural Minnesota is becoming much more fragmented in its advocacy. There are few unifying voices. Meanwhile, statewide organizations are following the flow of money and members to the Twin Cities and regional centers, placing much more emphasis on non-rural agendas. And I think that I'm a member of several different statewide economic development organizations. They typically hold their meetings in St. Paul. They're typically like an afternoon meeting. Well, that's fine if you live close, but if you don't, pretty tough to say I'm going to run down, St. Paul for a 2-hour meeting. So unintentionally, the metropolitan area gets overrepresented. That's not a fault. That's not a criticism. It's just a reality of what can happen on some of those statewide groups. So what are other regions doing? What can we look at? What ideas can we capture? How are they having success? What can we do to do that, to replicate it? So we look in the metropolitan area. In the last couple of years, there's been the creation of something called the Greater MSP, Greater Minneapolis-St. Paul, which is the 3-letter designator for the airport. Who is that? Much like what we're trying to do. It consists of businesses, chambers, local governments, and et cetera. But in addition, it isn't just them advocating for the metropolitan area. You have a state agency in the Met Council that is advocating for light rail, other infrastructure projects in the metropolitan area. We don't have an equivalent agency. In addition, because the Minnesota State Chamber, not local chambers, but the state chamber itself really doesn't have an economic development platform. They don't believe in it. Local chambers are of significant size in the metropolitan area. They actually have their own lobbyists. So you have 3 chambers, Minneapolis, the St. Paul, and the Twin West Chamber, that in varying degrees employ lobbyists to advocate on their behalf in St. Paul, and they've been able to turn those into projects. I think one of the things that frustrated me a couple of years ago, and a good example of how this can work, is when the legislature decided to do the Viking Stadium. And regardless of how you feel about how that should have been done, you could see that it was going to get done. And the St. Paul delegation organized, and they were able to get funding for the St. Paul Saints. There were some other things that they were able to get done in exchange for their votes on the Viking Stadium. I was trying to rally as many rural guys as I could and say, wait a minute, what's the offset? The same year, Rochester, St. Cloud, and Mankato were all trying to get additional money for their convention centers. To me, there was a natural, why don't we say we want $300 million in the bonding bill to offset this? And it was hard to do because all those communities were all fighting individually saying, we want to fund this, we want to fund this, we want to fund this, where together I think we would have had more success. So I think that it's a good example of why we need to do a better job. So partnership is a new organization, and we've had some early success. Last year, we were part of the coalition itself, and now we're a standalone. But there are three things that I think really highlight the success that we had last year. One is an internship tax credit. We had a bill, Greater Minnesota only. This is an example of we're making the case that this makes more sense in Greater Minnesota. Our manufacturers tell us they're having a more difficult time relative to their peers in the metro area or others attracting interns. So this will roll out in 2014 and will provide a 40% tax credit up to $2,000 a year. Greater Minnesota only. MnSCU, the state schools had a statewide bill. They weren't successful, but we were successful in this. Second piece is the Greater Minnesota Business Expansion Program. This is very similar to one of the provisions in the It's very similar to one of the provisions of Job Z. So we were able to preserve the sales tax portion of that. A qualifying expansion starting in 2014 could qualify for 12-year sales tax exemption. And probably, I think the most important thing that we influenced and why, again, we need to do a better job of organizing, the bottom, modify the Job Creation Fund so it's more useful in Greater Minnesota. The Job Creation Fund is the replacement for Job Z. So we take a Greater Minnesota program, Job Z, replace it with the Job Creation Fund or a closing fund. They work very well in other states, gives the governor and department a lot of flexibility to come in and go after projects. The reason I say we modified it is, as introduced, there was one standard throughout the state. You had to create an $18 an hour or more job, and the capital investment requirements were relatively high. As many people, you all know, that an $18 an hour job here looks a lot different than an $18 an hour job in the metropolitan area. So you're really creating, that would have created a program which I think would have worked great in the metro area, but not as well for us. We were able to modify that and now have a two-tier, Greater Minnesota capital investment and the Greater Minnesota starting wage. And so that's the type of thing that, it's not a criticism of anybody that didn't get introduced that way, but if somebody's not there to watch it and say, hey, this won't work quite as well for us, we're going to have a problem. We talked about the 2014 session. What are we up to? I came on board as the executive director. We're going to be governed now by our own board of directors. We're in the midst of putting that together, and we're out conducting regional meetings to set our agenda. We want to get that input from folks like you to make sure we know what will work and what won't work. I spoke about it earlier. Our plan is to put together this bigger package for the 2014 session, understanding that it won't be passed next year, but to then incorporate that into the 2014 gubernatorial race. The coalition always has a very successful governor's debate, and this will be part of it. Hey, here's our plan. This is what we think Greater Minnesota needs over the next 20 years. Are you with us, or how can we find common ground to get that done? So we talked a little bit about Shutterfly in the last meeting because it does have some spin-off throughout the state, and it's a project that happened in the metropolitan area, but I think we should all celebrate that. I mean, I always wanted, when I was in Albert Lea, I thought every job should be created in Albert Lea, but if not Albert Lea, I wanted it in Minnesota. It doesn't do us any good to have something leave the state. So anytime something comes in the state, even if it's in the metropolitan area, we should all rejoice. So it's Shutterfly, and for those of you who don't know, Shutterfly is kind of an online presence. You can go store your pictures out there, but the way they monetize that, the way they make their money is they also allow you to click on your pictures and create your own book with paper products from this part of the state, and put it in a book, mail it out to you, get it off for Christmas presents or whatever, and they have been a very successful company. So this is from the August Star Tribune and looks at why they chose to locate it in Minnesota, what were the factors. And several of them had to do with the availability of things that were already in place in Shakopee from an infrastructure standpoint that weren't in place really anywhere else, most of the places in Greater Minnesota. So we really never had an opportunity, but we are thankful that they're in Minnesota. So what did they look at? What did Shutterfly say? Well, why there? They wanted to be in the Midwest because they've got a strong customer base, and they got down to we want to be in Minnesota. And so as they started to filter through the places they wanted to be, they were looking for good highway infrastructure. That's where the Greater MSP came in, also with local business and governments to help recruit them. And the state and city offered $3 million in incentives, including broadband improvements, even though they already had pretty robust broadband relative to what we have, property tax abatement, a job training grant, and a forgivable loan. We want to make sure that these tools are available and the infrastructure is in place in Greater Minnesota so that the next time there's an opportunity like that, we'll stand a better chance of it landing outside the metropolitan area. So, what will keep jobs in Greater Minnesota, and how can we make Greater Minnesota competitive? We've kind of broken it out into three areas: workforce, business climate, community investments. We're going to talk a little bit about these. We want to get some input from you on these issues. Let's start with community investments. These are some questions to start thinking about. Do we need better roads and bridges? Do we need better public infrastructure, sewer, water, that type of thing? How about the broadband? Is it okay? Do we need to do a better job there? And are there other amenities, kind of a general comment that would help us? And think of it just totally what would help versus can the state really do anything about it? We just want all the ideas as we move forward. One of the big things that we hear a lot about and is being discussed are transportation issues. This is from the DOT 20-year projection. The 20-year projection the DOT puts out is based on available funding based on current law. So it assumes there will be no new revenues coming in. But according to this, there's approximately $6 billion needed for Greater Minnesota transportation in the next 20 years, and that does not count our county road or city system. Funding deficiencies in this area will put us at a competitive disadvantage. So last year, there was a new program developed called the Corridors of Commerce. Where did it come from? How did we get here? What does it do? But it is a transportation funding program, and its design is the idea is to help address the infrastructure in the state's economy, to build capacity in our highway system, remove bottlenecks, help us get our goods to market, help us get raw materials to where they need to be, improve the movement of freight, and remove barriers to commerce. The initial funding for this was $300 million in trunk highway bonds. The need identified by the DOT, which so it could be greater, is $750 to $1.1 billion for Greater Minnesota alone. That number, there's a light rail project happening in the metropolitan area, the Southwest Corridor, and part of that is, if you follow it, it's an existing freight line that runs to Minneapolis, and now they want to run a light rail on there, and there's an option of either, you got to do something with the freight train, those darn freight trains, which is interesting. We all love them and think they're helpful for our industry, and there they want to move them. So the city of Minneapolis thought, well, let's just send those freight trains over to St. Louis Park. St. Louis Park didn't see it that way. They didn't think that was such a good idea. There was a plan to maybe run them together. It goes to a park area in Minneapolis. Nobody liked that idea. So they're thinking about burying them, creating a couple tunnels to bypass this area. The costs are going to be at least $400 million. And if you compare that to the $300 million, just that one little piece of that rail is the equivalent or more than what was funded here. Corridors of Commerce, how does it happen? This is another example of being organized, and good things will happen. 2013, the governor, his initial thoughts were, let's just do light rail this session. He's going to send his transportation commissioner out, which is happening now. He's out throughout the state getting input on that, and we'll push off highways into the future. Both the Highway 14 partnership and the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities said, no, we're not saying you shouldn't do light rail, but what we are saying is that there should be some road money in there as well, and we're able to insist that that happens. So we did get that balance, but it also sets up the stage for a 2014 transportation discussion, which should include roads and bridges. This is a map of the interregional corridor system. Again, is put out by the DOT. We have found in our meetings throughout the state that there are some things that should be included that aren't included, and in the packet that Mike handed out should be a copy of that map with some local projects that are in your area that have been identified as part of that system. So I think we'll stop here and take some input on this this area, the infrastructure area, Corridors of Commerce, is funding for the Corridors of Commerce program, or just transportation in general. How important is that for economic growth in our region? Yes, sir.
Do you have a dollar amount to get to this map the corridors and commerce map from what's existing today to the vision of this?
In Greater Minnesota, the corridors of commerce alone could be, or is estimated to be, $1 billion. But that includes only those particular corridors, not the entire rural system. Please.
I'll just share that Commissioner Zelli is going to be in town on his tour around the state next week on Thursday at 4:30 at the State University Goes Our Ballroom. So for those of you who want to have a face-to-face with Commissioner Zelli from the Department of Transportation should definitely come to that. But I think Senator Saxhog maybe can update on the project in our region that the corridors of commerce right now that's on the table for us.
I think that as you see in your packet there, that the project we're talking about on the corridors is the one between Cass Lake and Deer River. Generally, from Duluth to Grand Forks on Highway 2, it's a pretty good road, whether it's super 2-lane or 4-lane. And this is the one area where, because it goes through Leech Lake, the Leech Lake Bands Reservation, and the Chippewa National Forest, it's a little more sensitive. And I think agreement has been reached with those two organizations for, I believe it's 4 passing lanes. So and it's relatively inexpensive compared to some of the other projects we're talking about here. So I think that's why it's high priority. And I've been told we're pretty close to getting that done.
Wonderful. This is, we're going to talk about, this is the public infrastructure question. There is a program out there called the Business Development Public Infrastructure Program. What it does is it funds public infrastructure for businesses. It's created a bunch of jobs in Greater Minnesota. The question is it needed? Has it worked? I guess I don't know if Bemidji has used it. It would surprise me if they haven't. But if you're going to open up an industrial park or something like that, somebody's going to do something, you want to get up to a 50% grant, up to usually $500,000 in order to help put in the public infrastructure, which is currently designed to be, road, the sewer, water, that type of thing. We should also include broadband, but we'll get to that in a minute. But public infrastructure, are you doing that in that area? Is there enough dollars being spent there? Is there additional need in public infrastructure for job growth and creation? Or are we on track?
I can share from the city's perspective.
Please.
That we have definitely utilized that program, and it needs to be funded again by the legislature. Examples in our community where we've used it include the Industrial Park South Annex, where we used the BDPI program to help build Fensky Avenue so that North Central Door could relocate there. We also used the Minnesota Investment Fund for that relocation, so that was another example of a program that the legislature has. I think that should be funded. The other place in our community that we used the BDPI program was in partnership with the county to develop an area out at the airport for some additional infrastructure, streets and sewer and water for potential air-related development. So we think it's important. I think we got about $250,000 on each of those projects. So it's been a big help to the city and the county.
Okay. We agree. We think it's a good program and should be expanded and funded. In fact, one of the ideas that we're not sure if it'll fit in and we're thinking about, because it came out of meetings like this, is there some way that we could use this for workforce housing? Could it be adjusted to, because in many communities in Greater Minnesota, there's such a need for, I always talk about low-income housing, but really I think in communities like ours, it's workforce housing is really more important. All right, let's move on. Broadband, why is it important and how does it affect your community? The more I learn and read about this, the more I think that we really need to be aggressive and at the table and really expand this into Greater Minnesota, or we are not going to be as successful as other communities. Broadband, allowing people to live, work in Greater Minnesota. Who would need it? Business in general. As as more things are being done online, things are being designed, sent all over the world. They need a robust internet service. Farming, there's more precision farming going on than ever before. That is going to only continue. Mining, logging, there's going to be an even greater need in the future. Healthcare, not just the facility itself, but also to your home. I think that healthcare, when I talk to healthcare providers in the future, you're probably going to get talk to somebody over your computer before you actually have to go into the clinic, whether that's a nurse practitioner or an RN or maybe the doctor. But a lot of the telemedicine is going to increase. That means that you can't just have a good connection at the hospital. The homes also have to have a decent connection, or you're not going to be able to do that. Education, clearly important to, our kids tend to live further away from their schools than in other areas. Independent living, we all want our kids to, grow up here, go away to college, and then come back. How do we get them back? Well, you better have a pretty decent broadband program, because they're kind of a new age, the millennials, that's very important to them. Without broadband, our business and residents, we're going to leave ourselves behind. There is a correlation between broadband, job creation, broadband, and income. This chart on the left-hand side is median household income. As the percentage of houses with broadband hookup goes up, incomes go up, number of firms go up, the better the broadband availability is. I think there's a stat in there somewhere. I think it's 100 for every, if you move from 4 megabit download per second to 8, you'll see an increase on average of $120 a month in wages increased. So how is Greater Minnesota doing? This is, earlier I talked about where we only have about half the connectivity. Those are the red colors, the 10 megabit downloads, 6 megabit upload. The blue chart is 25 and 6. How do we do? Well, metropolitan area, they're 92 and 93%. We're at 42, and then at the real high speed, we're only at 32% of our connectivity in Greater Minnesota. We think we can and need to do a better job. In fact, it probably isn't just 25 bits per second. It's probably going to be closer to 100 very soon, and we need to make sure that the infrastructure is in place so that we can provide that service. So what are some policy options? One, definition, defining our broadband goals. What is it? Should we allow and reduce the barriers to public entities if the private firms are saying, we don't see that market, we don't want to invest in that capital, much like utility co-op or cooperative cities that have their own public utilities and electricity, could they offer this? And there are some barriers in state law to doing that. And one of the things would be to clear up the ambiguity in state law about funding that. We talked about the business infrastructure program. Right now, if you're going to open that road up into that industrial park, you can apply for roads, the bridges, the sewer, the water, but you couldn't use it to run fiber. That's not considered infrastructure. That's just a tweak in the state law to fix that, but we just need to get there. And then what, if any, long-term incentives should we provide to make sure we get that high-quality broadband to all the communities in the state? So at this point, we'll stop again. How is the broadband connection, not just in the cities, but the townships? How are you doing in general? Could it be better? Should it be better? Would it be helpful? What are your thoughts?
In the rural sector, what's happened is some communities are extremely well developed, and others are sitting there waiting for help. And how that works itself out across the state is very uneven. And so when we look at the numbers, some communities are contributing immensely to that number, while others are not.
Agreed.
We'll give Bemidji as an example. I think I'd like to hear from the other areas that aren't kind of in the Bemidji region, but we are served by 3 advanced telecom providers in the city. This city, I think it's we probably have more providers of anybody that I'm aware of. A city this size of CenturyLink of Mid-Continent, and of course Paul Bunny Communications is overlaying fiber to their entire service territory. And so we feel pretty good in Bemidji, but I agree with you, Dan, that is a critical issue for economic development.
And you're ahead of a lot of other communities. Is there input from the other communities? How are you guys doing? Is it okay? Do you need more help there? Please.
I'd definitely say it's a big need. Me and my partner here, Nick, we run a sign company over in Moorhead, and we're from the region. Want to move back and work and move our design and creation of signs. It's a lot of sign stuff. And the one problem we have is in Bagley, where we've set up a shop right now. We have internet connection there, but sometimes we're connected to the server but have no internet access. And it's extremely frustrating because for a lot of our design work, we need to be tapped into the internet. And even just trying to communicate with customers and stuff, it creates a hassle. And this is a place where we want to be back and want to be in.
We've seen in Albert Lee, our North Industrial Park doesn't have fiber access, and we have seen firms leave the southern part of where we have another industrial park over broadband. And 10 years ago, they weren't thinking about that. And now there's a couple businesses out there, and we're trying to figure out how are we going to get that better service to them. And so, it is, I think, a huge issue. It's going to only become more important. So, other comments? Yes, please.
I work with the Department of Employment and Economic Development, specifically with workforce. And the largest number of people that come into our centers are looking for access to technology, and that's the way business hires now. And if they can't get it at home where they live, then they need to go to centers. And there are only limited centers around the state, where, especially in rural areas, where people can gain access to technology. And then along with that, which is really a workforce issue, but having the skills to even use that technology. And that really limits the availability of skills for businesses as it relates to workforce.
Great. Yes, ma'am.
I work with the same department as Kathy does on the business development side. My name is Kari Howe, and the legislature last year did show the importance of broadband through the Blandon Foundation funding. So there's been a study done, and now our office is in the process of hiring someone to really start working on those issues around the state, recognizing all the gaps and the needs that are out there in much of the state. So we're moving forward. Nothing's going to happen overnight, obviously, but the Office of Broadband will be housed in our area. So stay tuned for those communities who are looking to see some direction that way, some support.
Great. And we want to help.
Yeah.
And we want to help. Okay. Mike, should we move on?
Sure.
Next topic, next area is workforce. Questions to start thinking about. Do we develop and attract and train and retain an adequate workforce? What about workforce housing? Are there other supports, issues that deal with supporting the families so that they can live, work, and play in greater Minnesota?
No question the world needs more jobs. But in some places, there are jobs that are just waiting to be filled. And sometimes, in some sectors, there are jobs to be had or created, but no available workers with the skills to fill them. Most of the world's population have very low levels of education and lack basic technical and cognitive skills. A skilled labor force can help reduce poverty, increase productivity, even transform whole economies if workers have the right kinds of skills. Even people who attend schools, vocational centers, and universities might not acquire the right skills that are needed to land a job. That's not only about job-specific skills, behavioral skills matter too. Firms often complain about the lack of qualified workers. So how do we get workers and firms to invest in the right skills? In many cases, businesses take care of their own training, like in India, where IT companies organized and financed very successful training for workers in their industry. But on-the-job training can be expensive, and in some cases, firms won't offer it because of concern that the returns would be too small, or concern that other firms will poach their newly skilled workers. There are many things that governments have tried to do to help, providing training directly, subsidizing vocational training, and providing financial incentives for firms to train from within.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Miller. I'm the lobbyist for the Greater Minnesota Partnership. And last year, when we were a smaller organization than we planned to be in 2014, we had a job training program that we brought to the legislature. Unfortunately, it didn't pass, but we were very proud of the parameters of the program. Essentially, what our idea was, and by saying our idea, I mean the idea we stole from North Dakota, was to tell businesses, look, you have jobs available. There are people without jobs. Let's match the two of you up, even if they don't have, the employees don't have the necessary skills. So you hire those people. You bring them on board, and you can do whatever kind of training it is you'd like to do. If you want to do on-the-job training, that's fine. If you want to bring in a private trainer, go right ahead. If you want to send people to a community college for 1 or 2 classes, take care of it, whatever works for you. And what we said was the state will then take the new income taxes from those newly trained and hired employees and hold on to them until the training is complete. Then the state will take the money, the new income taxes, and reimburse the business for the cost of the training. So essentially, the employees' taxes are paying for their own training. And the way we saw it was a win-win-win, in that the employee was getting training that they could use in the future to do the job that was required of them. The employer was getting the correctly trained employees to do the job, and the state was getting jobs that wouldn't be there but for this level of training. So we saw it as a huge win, but as the legislators in the room will tell you, sometimes legislation needs to sit at the Capitol and percolate for a little while, so we're kind of hoping this is one of those issues that'll pop back up again, if not in 2014, in 2015 for sure. Or perhaps there's someone in this room with a better idea as to kind of how to tweak that to maybe make it something that'll work as well. I did see Senator Schmidt walk in, and I was right now racking my brain to figure out how to step back to the broadband discussion.
I think you just say, hey, we want to go back to the broadband discussion.
Hey, we want to go back to the broadband discussion. So, Senator, if you'd like to come up. This is Senator Matt Schmidt from Red Wing. He is taking the lead in the legislature on the broadband discussion. So if we could just take a quick step back and talk broadband, then we'll give you guys some time to absorb broadband and think about the job training issue. So this is Senator Matt Schmidt.
Well, thank you, and sorry for running late today, folks. I'm a state senator from Red Wing, so I had a bit of a drive this morning, and I got started in the Twin Cities, but nonetheless, I have been on the road since early morning. Very excited to see this level of discussion taking place here in Bemidji and throughout Minnesota, and I'm convinced, as Vice Chair of the Senate Jobs and Rural Development Committee, that this is exactly the kind of conversation we have to have in Minnesota. As you heard earlier this morning, Minneapolis-St. Paul has been really effective in galvanizing its own approach to economic development for the metropolitan area. And we can gain so much in rural Minnesota by having that same kind of conversation. Obviously, we have different corners of the state with different priorities, but I think if we focus on tools and approaches for strengthening economic development in rural Minnesota, we can all benefit. Whether you're in Bemidji or you're in Red Wing or you're up on the range, I think we all have an opportunity to benefit. One thing that I'm really passionate about here, as you heard earlier, is that discussion about broadband. And I think it is a key area for us to be focusing on. I think it's a great opportunity for leveling the playing field for job growth and economic activity in greater Minnesota. And there's parts of the state where you've really seen great, entrepreneurial and creative approaches succeed. But other parts of rural Minnesota are struggling. They're either unserved or completely underserved in their access to the internet. And as we think about the importance of that connectivity and accessing the internet for commerce, for telehealth, for precision agriculture, for the way education is conducted today, you really have to have that connectivity in rural Minnesota. And I'm very interested in elevating that discussion in the form of these sorts of conversations throughout the state and bringing that back to the Capitol in the next couple of years, because I think there's more that the state can do to strengthen creative approaches at the local level, whether it's clarifying existing law, strengthening the cooperative model, giving communities more options, and also leveraging resources for getting things done. And I would love to be the state that leads this country and really the world in making sure that we're getting 21st century infrastructure, not just traditional roads and bridges. We know the importance of those, but getting that 21st century broadband infrastructure out to our rural markets. So I hope that you guys are all interested in that. I would love to talk some more about it maybe after the session today, or else down the road. I'll leave my contact information here. And I'd really encourage, first of all, you guys to get behind this Greater Minnesota Economic Development Partnership idea. And secondly, to make broadband and 21st century infrastructure an essential element of that partnership. So I guess with that said, if there's any questions, I'd love to stand for them. Otherwise, I know that I'm Johnny-come-lately here today, and I'll let you move on with your agenda. So if there's any questions, feel free. Otherwise, Just thanks for your interest in this area.
Senator, thank you for making the trip up.
Absolutely.
Appreciate that very much. If anyone else has comments, too, jump in. Don't hold back. So, job training questions, are they adequate? Are there training gaps that we need to fill? Or what can we do better in this job training area? This is where, again, we'd like some input on what are you seeing in the programs? How are they working? Could they be improved upon? Should we rob that idea from North Dakota or go steal the one from Iowa? That works pretty similarly. Easier to steal something, I think, and improve upon it than it is to create it. So, but what are your thoughts? Please.
I'd like to challenge in a different area. Anderson Fabric works from up at Black Duck, and we train our own employees. I have no problem with that. I just have a problem getting people. We have a business that sells labor, so it's not for everybody, but it's a fun, clean atmosphere. And our average labor rate is over $11 an hour. It's not $18, but that certainly is a place for everybody. But what we found, even during the height of the recession, we'd put advertising in the paper, on websites and so on. We couldn't get people because too many people found out they could live in these areas anyway effectively on unemployment. And I had a person, a very skilled person, leave us the other day because making a decent buck, but she can do better on welfare, quite frankly, than she can do working at Anderson Fabrics. I got to compete with overseas stuff. So what's the balance there? I got to think when she left that, boy, wouldn't it be nice if they could supplement her, but she could still be working for me because we need her. And I'm not sure if there's some balancing act there or not. Also, people can go back to school now, and I'm finding that quite often, where the government will pay for them, for their kids, everything while they're in school, and then they end up coming back to us anyway after they've been in school for 2 or 4 years. Who paid for that? And we missed them for that 2 or 4 years. So how can some of those things be balanced to help the workforce? And the federal government talks about that the new acceptable unemployment rate in this nation is going to be 6%. It floored me. Because here we have all the baby boomers retiring, and the government's going to go from 4% to 6%. Let's put the people to work and find out a way for them to go to work. I think the state of Minnesota will be challenged to have their average labor rate of 3%, because as more and more baby boomers retire, more and more people need to be put to work. And if they can find that they can get things for free, I think there's an awful lot of people out there, I'm afraid, that won't go to work. So how do we get that balance? Get them trained and so on.
We'll go here and then go.
I just want to chime in a little bit too, as the Vice Chair of the House Jobs Economic Development Committee. We welcome this discussion again, and as was alluded to, things don't happen in one session often, and we had a significant tax bill this last session, and so let's have this discussion again. I will welcome that. A lot of good ideas.
Thank you for being here. We want to help you. Wonderful. Dave.
Just to affirm the topic, which is that talent has got to be the #1 issue that this group focuses on. When I talk to our companies, or I talk to companies looking at the Bemidji area, it is always the #1 issue. Can we attract, can we get the people we need with the right skills to be successful here? And part of that becomes a conversation about quality of life too, and quality of place. And, you know, as much as I love rural Minnesota and certainly Bemidji area, it can be acquired taste still, in a sense, in that it's not for everyone. And so we here, of course, we export our talent. We've got Bemidji State University, Northwest Tech colleges, three tribal colleges. We're exporting talent, and so the ability to grow and attract and keep talent has got to be central to this conversation. I remember when Governor Palenti introduced the Job Z program back 10 years ago now. We were up at Articat in Roseau, and I remember the head of Articat saying to him, "Governor, we like tax breaks, and we'll take everyone you offer to us. But if you really want to have an impact on our company, make sure people love Roseau. I want to live in Roseau." And so we can't lose sight of those investments that attract and keep talent to the place where the jobs are.
Good. Yes.
Can I just add one more thing? I'm old, so in January I walk out the door.
That's what you wanted to add? Well, okay.
There's something with it.
Note that down.
Well, I know I live to eat, and I'm retiring, but I'm not ready to retire. And much of the people that are my age have huge amounts of talent and work experience, knowledge, skills, and ability. They don't want to work full-time, and they want to give back to their community. And I don't know if there could be some financial kind of tax thing or something for hiring old people and keeping them working. But I think the businesses are going to need a whole mix of employees portfolio. And the new worker coming in, but they also need some of us on the other side to help support. And if we could kind of figure out maybe some financial benefit there, I don't know what that is.
And we're going to need that experience.
Exactly.
We really are. If we're going to be competitive and successful, we're going to need it. You know, it reminds me, it's just human nature. We're sort of back to, I took my job in ORV, timing terrible. Look at July of 2007, the economy's going like this, and then it goes like this. Well, at the start of 2007, everybody's saying, where are we going to get the employees for the next, right? Because we're so reactive to the current situation. We took our foot off that gas pedal and we said, well, boy, you know, unemployment's up today, how are we going to fix that? We should have continued to say, you know, the demographic numbers are going to change. We're going to have a job shortage, a worker shortage, a worker train shortage. It didn't change. It just kind of took a little time out, but we need to stay focused on that long term. How are we going to provide quality opportunities for people and take advantage of the trained people that are retiring but still want to give back? Yes, a good example of someone who's giving back.
One other thing we need to realize is the incredible change in the knowledge base that's going on. Because every minute there's 17 major breakthroughs happening throughout the world. That's 25,000 new things a day. And with that happening, it's changing the way everybody does business in every kind of way. And so we can train them and get them started, but we have to get engaged and stay the course so that we're not reacting, but we are implementing, having others react to us.
Dave?
And I have to add an irony of this, which is while talent has become the #1 issue, the state's investment in education has gone down. Particularly in the school districts and our higher eds, and that can't continue. We're kind of resting on our lead, if you will, and that cannot continue for us to be successful.
We turn that around.
And good. Keep it going that way.
As a native of Roseville, I just have to set the record straight. It's Polaris.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Darn it. 60 miles. 60 miles. A very significant thing for my hometown. A lot of what we're discussing here is talking about funding. We're talking dollars. You know, we're talking $6 billion worth of just basic road infrastructure needs. We're talking about how can we get this workforce up to speed. And now we're talking about broadband issues where, you know, the people from my home, where my home is now in Lake of the Woods County, we got 4,000 people spread out an awful long ways. Well, those kids come into school and, you know, 20-some years ago when I was teaching, 1 out of 10 had internet access. Now it's much higher than that, but it's those 2 or 3 out of the 10 that don't have internet at home come into the schools. And I mean, we're really talking about behind the 8 ball type of stuff when you're trying to get ready to move on to a job. If you're a couple of years behind on computer skills, man, you have a really hard time catching up. And so we're talking about an awful lot of things here, and we're also talking about money. You know, we had the political will to raise a couple of $2 billion in taxes this year. Do we have that political will again? Will we get support from the greater Minnesota area if we want to do that, to spend money in greater Minnesota? Now, I'm not 100% certain that the political will in greater Minnesota to raise more money to fix our infrastructure needs, to fix our broadband needs. We've done a pretty good job of getting our schools refunded, but even still, there are needs unmet out there. So you know, although I admire the whole concept of this group, getting different organizations to get focused on there, you know, we really have a lot of issues, even if we get organized.
Funding the Minnesota Housing Finance Corp is very important. For example, in our community, Keepers Construction out of St. Cloud has been building some affordable rental 32-unit multifamily buildings, and you know, they've kind of abandoned the state process just because it's been too onerous for them to really get that money from the state. So looking at those policies and procedures for how do developers in greater Minnesota access funding for low-income housing is what, or workforce rental housing is what that company is building. But what's the process and how can that better serve greater Minnesota would be helpful.
Okay, wonderful.
And what Rita's talking about, there are other manufacturing homes in the state. If there could be some kind of a, like even in this region up here in Red Lake Falls, we have Homemark, and they're building manufacturing inside is what they're doing that makes them different. And if there's a synergy that could happen with some of these communities and some opportunities to be able to do that, you know, and made in Minnesota is always really nice too if we're going to provide housing in our own state. So maybe there's some synergies that way as well.
Sure.
And dynamic homes in Detroit.
Yes.
Great. Okay, let's move on. Are there other issues that, again, whether the state can really do anything or not, sort of curious to know what the challenges might be, but childcare, is it expensive, is it available, how are your schools doing, recreational activities, cultural activities, opportunities for dual income households or trailing spouses. You've got a company trying to recruit somebody, but they also need to find a job for their spouse. What issues do you see here that you think deserve some attention?
I would say I hear from manufacturers all the time that they have so much trouble getting employees that can pass the drug test. Is anybody else hearing that?
Yes.
I think that's part of the, if we think about that unemployment, is who's employable, who's not employable. You know, is that going to be part of that, that there's going to be a set of people that aren't because of that issue? That's a good point.
Child care is absolutely a problem too, making sure that people have a place to be able to send their kids that's affordable and so on. And then backup care is another problem.
We've heard in a couple of different meetings that it isn't just the 8 to 5, but also, you know, if your company runs 2 shifts or 3 shifts, that's a very difficult problem for some people. I'm not sure I got the answer to that one, but you know, I think that's something we should think about how could we address it if possible. So.
One of the things in rural America we find is that regional hubs can tend to find their way with it and make it happen. But you move down one more step in size of a community, and then it really gets tough. I mean, it's just expands immensely. How am I going to compete if I'm in this small community, I'm far away from the hub, and how am I going to make that happen?
And those small communities, a lot of times, are very important to the hub. We had a meeting in Rochester, and I had to be there at 7:45, and the highway I came in on, and there was a traffic jam of people from the surrounding communities that are driving into work. And so that's a whole part of that infrastructure program, and I think the progressive regional centers understand that, which is, you know, keeping these communities near them vital is important to that regional center.
Can I just add something to that?
Absolutely.
And it goes back to your broadband, but telework could be one of the solutions where people have to have the broadband, but can be working out of their home. And right now, United Health has 45,000 jobs that are telework jobs, and it doesn't work for all business, but there are many, many businesses that their accounting, their marketing, whatever could be done from someone working at home. And it takes care of the child care, the transportation, a whole lot of other issues.
Great point. Okay. Business climate questions. How are we doing there? Think about this in terms of access to capital. Is there a support network or expertise that's missing? And are there specific tax issues to greater Minnesota businesses that could make a difference? And do regulatory issues impede economic development growth in greater Minnesota? I thought it was interesting, a couple weeks ago, there was a Forbes magazine released a study that said that Minnesota was the 8th in business climate, but the study did not distinguish between greater Minnesota and the metropolitan area. So I think that, okay, that's true, we're probably number 8, but there was a study done back in 2007, we're going to try to get it updated. It had been done prior to that, the results were always about the same. And what that study looked at was, okay, that's great if you treat all the states as one state, but what if you break out the metropolitan areas from the non-metropolitan areas in these 50 states, and then look at that same thing, how do we score? And in the most recent study, we were 42nd. And this is not a change from when I was in the legislature. A couple organizations would study property taxes, and what they would do is they would take a similar building in a metropolitan area of Minnesota, a metropolitan area of another state, say Denver, then they would take that same building or similar building in greater Minnesota and a similar building in the greater, Colorado area, and take a look at the cost of doing business. The worst place, if that was your only, which is the only reason people choose to go somewhere, but was Minnesota, and in greater Minnesota, we were at a disadvantage relative to the metropolitan area. So we're going to see if we can round up some money to update this study. I hope it's changed, I really do, but I got a sneaking suspicion that if we took the metropolitan area and we broke it out, the metropolitan area is actually probably higher than 8th, and we're much lower depending on the area. So I think we can indeed do a better job there. So some of the ideas, this is the access to capital question. I think it sometimes depends on what region of the state in. I found that for most projects, most expansions, if there's a good business plan, a solid, you've got some capital, it makes sense, that there really isn't, for that type, there isn't access to capital. In fact, probably never a better time to go borrow money and build something because interest rates are at an all-time low, and many banks are trying to get dollars out. Where there might be a bit of a need is on the micro entrepreneur loans, real small, like $5,000 or $10,000 loans. In the agency I work for, we have some loan funds that we could use for that purposes. We extended somebody a $10,000 loan to go into a spa or haircutting place. They went through bankruptcy a couple of years ago. It wasn't a bankable deal, but to them, that $10,000, that loan, which they had repaid as agreed, was a way to start over, and so that was important to them. So access to capital, how could we do it? Are there changes to existing programs? We've tried over, this is a good example of why we need to have a seat at the table and speak effectively for greater Minnesota. There's an angel investor tax credit. I think it's been out there for at least 2 or 3 years. We have 2 or 3 years of track record, and unfortunately, I don't have my chart with me, but it looks like a little Pac-Man. If you look at where's this money being spent, over 90% of it has went into the metropolitan area, and I got a sneaking suspicion if you included Rochester in that, you're going to approach 100%. The details of that program are not allowing it to work in greater Minnesota. This might be one that we again say, great, this is a metropolitan project or program that works great for them, here's what we need. And so that's the type of thing we want to take a look at to make sure that it works, whatever ideas that do come up, that they work for us. Community capital fund ideas, rural enterprise funds, micro enterprise tax credit. There's a Minnesota Loan Guarantee Program that I think started last year but wasn't funded. So there's some ideas out there. But in general, what is the need? Is there access to capital? Let's go through a couple of these. We'll stop again. This is a Nebraska model of what they did to get some money into the micro entrepreneurs program. It's just suck up all your time, so we're going to bypass this a little bit, but this is an idea that we're looking at from Nebraska. Again, small loans, and what does that mean? Well, in greater Minnesota, these small loans can create a good employment for people. So should we talk about capital, and then we'll come to the tax questions? What about access to capital? What are you seeing, what are you hearing? I know there's several bankers in the room. You got money to loan, I would assume?
Yeah, one of the things that, I've been in the Bemidji area here for about 6, 7 years now,
starting business, starting expanding, you know, access to capital may require a business plan, projections, etc. SBDC is a real great resource, and yet in this location, it's really kind of started and stopped. We had a sponsor at DSU, we've had a sponsor at Concordia College, we've had a sponsor now at UMD. And so, you know, just a consistent access to something as simple as helping entrepreneurs or business owners put together, you know, a business plan for expansion or for a new business along with projections. They don't have the time really to help with those types of things. You know, they're more busy working 12, 14 hours a day on their business, let alone having to do kind of what the bankers need, if you want to say that. And so I think some help, some consistent help in delivering those SBDC services that we don't have to, you know, and then they're out looking for money from the business community to help them to fund this. You know, and it's just absolutely critical, you know, as we've found in our economic development group here in Bemidji, that it's absolutely critical to have a stable economic base that we don't always have to worry about where our next dollar is coming from so we can provide the services. That SBDC is just a critical item to any community's entrepreneurs to get access to capital. And if they're always looking for money, spending half their time out there looking for money from the business community, they can't do what they're designed to do. So that would be my...
Great.
And that's a state policy question. I mean, that's the SBDC model, if you ask me, it's a critical service, gotta have it. Up in Northwest Minnesota, we have changed our service provider, the host organization, every 3 years. It's like I've seen the movie before. And so, and it is not to blame BSU or UMC or Duluth or Concordia College. The model is broken. And we've got to, at the state level, figure out how can we change the model so we have consistent, quality, critical services for our rural areas.
Because those services that are provided at the SBDCs are, they're darn handy. Exactly. Okay, great.
Can I?
You can.
I just want to jump backwards for a moment to the whole quality of place issue that you asked about right before this, and we didn't talk about tourism. And tourism is a really important thing in our communities. I was just looking online. In Beltrán County, it's $80 million a year in gross sales, and in the Northwest area, it's almost $500 million in sales and over 10,000 jobs. So I think that paying attention to the quality of our lakes and waters and prairie lands and all of that, our forests is an important thing that we don't want to forget as part of our economic development strategy.
Exactly. Great.
The organization I work for has had an SBA microloan program almost since the beginning. And, you know, it is a high-risk, fly by the seat of your pants type of program, but we do pretty well, and that's because in their wisdom, the program was designed with accompanying technical assistance. So that's what makes those microloan portfolios actually work, is that technical assistance. However, not every region of this state has an SBA microloan program. So that REAP model that you had up there from Nebraska could actually provide access to microloan dollars throughout the whole state. That's one comment.
Okay.
And I understand that REAP model works very well.
That's what we understand too. We're just starting to learn more and more about it, but the more information we gather, it seems like it could be a very productive tool.
And then my second comment, sorry, Carrie. We participated on the recent study that was done for the Angel tax credit.
Right.
We're participants in a private Angel network in Northwest Minnesota. And what struck me with that, you know, you mentioned the disparity. It's virtually non-existent participation up here. None of our 9 deals would have been eligible for that Angel tax credit. So it was more of a case where, heck, we need to do this on our own. One of our 9 is going to be a home run, a grand slam.
And of course, we're following the bell curve on some of those other investments, just like any other investment. So that struck me, that none of those 9 would have been eligible. So something needs to be done on that.
Yes?
And I don't know how many sessions you've had yet, but some of the things have been quite a bit around the state, don't they? Okay. The reason I'm wondering is because I'm wondering if you're hearing a couple things in terms of supporting the funding, and one is from pilot to commercialization gap, in terms of, as our state looks to be more innovative in using our resources, our timber, our ag industries in particular, and looking at how to use those more in the clean tech, renewable energy field. There seems to be a couple disparities. One is in pure R&D funding, and as we're moving into water technologies as well, and the water quality that we have in the state, there's an R&D component that can be tricky to fund at times. And also then, when you start to make the recipe to go from your idea to making it larger in scope, it's developing that recipe, and there's not a lot of funding that helps to go sometimes to pilot scale or from pilot to commercialization. Those are 2 areas, especially as we're looking in the state at renewable energy and moving in that direction. And I'm just wondering, the reason I was asking is if you're starting to hear that in some of the other parts of the state.
I haven't heard it, but I think the issue is there.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
No, I think it's very similar, throughout the state. There is not, the popular myth sometimes is that there's all this free money out there, and there really isn't. I mean, there is not. And so how do we help these people is very challenging, because they will come with that next idea that will then become manufacturing jobs or technology jobs.
And it's tricky because a lot of vetting and due diligence has to be done, because you don't want to throw a lot of money to projects that aren't going to be successful. So there's little pots, but they've got to dig for it. It's like a web out there, and it's really tricky.
Great. Okay. Yes, please.
I was going to say, sometimes in industry, looking for free money or looking for finance, a program we've used and kind of touches on, Lady in Purple there was saying that mentorship is SCORE, the SBA. Great program. I mean, it saved us a lot as far as just advice on what we should do, first or something, or just as opposed to going and paying an accountant or a lawyer, $150 an hour for a little bit of advice. Going to SCORE, where they have a wide array of individuals with specific. It's helped out immensely. I don't know if Bemidji has that with their SBA or not.
There's a chapter in Park Rapids off of the St. Cloud.
There is.
SCORE.
Okay.
Yeah, even budget.
Even if something like that, where a private organization doing that would be is immensely helpful.
I know they've tried to start them up here in the past, and one of the issues is all the snowbirds. The mentors are here for 6 months and then they're gone. So it's hard to keep an active membership, but if there was another way to do it, it wasn't necessarily SCORE, but a membership, some type of organization would be great.
And technology is going to help that as well. In our area, we regionalized ours, and we're using the Initiative Foundation in Montana, and it gives us SCORE members from a much bigger area than we had before. So if there's a particular need, instead of just relying on the people we might have in one community and half of them are gone, now all of a sudden there's that broader base that we can draw from it. And the technology is really making that a lot easier. So that has been a very effective tool in parts of the state that take advantage of it. Yes, please.
I just want to reinforce what Kari was saying about renewable energy and needing heightened for your group to be aware to represent us. We've got a crisis in forestry, in our use of resources, as the paper pulp industry is coming down. And we're all shouting about it, but we really need some support to do what Kari's talking about, and that is ideas that are vetted, and we do our due diligence, but how do we move from a fledgling or a huge industry to now coming back around to using that resource? And we need it in northern Minnesota. So not to diss anything happening in the rest of the state, but we really need to figure out.
No, but that's, even within our programs, there may be things that a tool that works well here that should be included that may not work in another part of greater Minnesota, but it might work for that particular industry. So those are important things to to realize it. And the key is that we need to organize and say, you know, if you're in the Rochester area, you know, that's still important, even though you're not going to harvest that crop of timber. It's still important in Greater Minnesota, and that's going to be our challenge, is to make sure we keep everything. So far, I've been, we were talking before the meeting, really encouraged by the participation at these meetings and by the willingness that I think is new for us to say, hey, we got more in this together than we do apart. And I think that the timing of this seems to be pretty good. So we're optimistic about that. We'll go here and then there. Yes, please.
You talked about North Dakota Job Service now. Great, that's been good. One thing North Dakota has on the financing side is Bank of North Dakota, which is a state-owned bank, and it's a banker's bank. So if a bank's to get into a project, and you know, a community bank like us, we maybe can't afford to take the whole thing, Bank of North Dakota comes in and they take part of the risk. That has really grown in rural North Dakota from a risk standpoint and getting community banks involved in these projects. I don't know how that worked in Minnesota. The problem with all these programs that come up from the state, most of the time the money's either gone by the time rural Minnesota hears about it or understands it, or it's not made for here. Or the paperwork is so cumbersome. If you're talking about a business with 10 employees, the owner can't step away from his job for 3 months to figure out how he's going to get his money. So,
great input. Right? Yeah.
Yes. When Mary's talking about the timber industry, that is so vital to not, you know, North Minnesota, but Sartell closed, you know, and that's down in St. Cloud. You're right, we've lost a lot of capacity for how we can utilize our renewable asset, which is incredible. And our state is really unique, and in terms of where agriculture and the forests are, more than just about any other state. And if we can work really hard at continuing to harness that and become, we don't have the fossil fuels that other states have. We have our natural resources, and to be able to leverage those on the state level to provide our own energy, not only as including solar and wind. Those are really going to be, I think, a keystone for Minnesota as we merge into the future. And if rural Minnesota could play a role in that, that would be awesome. You're going to see solar start to really grow, and there's companies that are combining wind and solar now.
Okay.
Biomass and solar.
Yep.
Biomass and solar.
Go ahead.
Yes.
There's the element of scale as well. If you're in a large metro area, you don't have to worry about who will deliver, who will benefit. So when Medtronic's going to build their new complex north of 694, the community was arguing whether they wanted it or not. There's thousands of engineers coming in there, and they're kind of wondering, do we want to do it? Because somebody else will if we don't. Where here, you die for 6 or 60 of those people in rural America.
I was struck by that during the meeting Dave put on before this. They were talking about, must be a pipeline, gas pipeline, I assume, going to locate in Bemidji and have the jobs here, and how is this going to work depending on the path. And it reminded me a little bit of when I was on the bonding committee in St. Paul, the differences in Greater Minnesota versus the metropolitan area. If you had that project, say in Burnsville, you would have people, how are we going to kill this? How are we going to stop it? We want the natural gas, but we want somebody else to have it. I remember when we were doing some bonding tours, the state was either going to expand the mental health facility at Anoka or in St. Peter. And frankly, it would have been less cost, and it made a whole lot more sense to put it in Anoka. They wanted nothing to do with it because they didn't want, they saw the offenders and didn't want them. St. Peter saw the jobs and wanted them. So it's a little bit different mentality in Greater Minnesota. We look at that and see opportunity where others don't. And that's the issue, I think, in the metropolitan area. They want it, but just somewhere else. And here we're saying, we'll take it, man, because we want the jobs. So, great point. Was there another comment, or are we ready to? You started slow as a group, but you're going to finish strong. That's wonderful. So, let's go to tax policy. Hear a lot about that. Are there ways to create incentives? Are there barriers here? And we're going to focus on this slide with the state commercial industrial property tax, particularly the statewide component of it. So if you don't pay commercial industrial property tax, which you should know, for those that do, about 26% of it doesn't go to our local units of government, but it goes to the state general fund. And so is that an obstacle to creating business and attracting businesses? And is the industrial tax on industrial property a bigger issue than it is on commercial property. I'll go back to my tire store for a minute. I'm in Albert Lea because there's a market. I'm less sensitive to the statewide business property tax than an industrial customer is. I'm worried they're going to slip off to Iowa. They're not there because of the market. They're there because of a lot of other reasons. Or is it not an issue at all? And there are several different policy choices that we could make. Kind of like in Job Z, we could exempt new business industrial expansions from the statewide business property tax for 12 years. We could exempt all industrial property tax, either statewide or in Greater Minnesota only. You should note that doesn't impact your cities and counties. One way to maybe create a incentive for the Main Streeters would be to exempt the first $150,000 from that commercial industrial property tax. How much would it cost? If we were to exempt, take $44 million a year to exempt the first $150,000 of commercial value in Greater Minnesota, it would only take $35 million a year to eliminate the statewide business property tax on industrial property. So it's not a big number in terms of the state budget, but it might create a incentive that we're looking for. So would reducing the statewide business property tax make any difference in the economic growth in Greater Minnesota? That's kind of the question. We're looking for your input. Please.
I'd like to jump in on that, just because you guys were talking about the forest industry up here. A lot of the, well, not a lot, but there has been some forested land that was basically, I would call it ag land, because they were growing the crop. But they're looking at a 60-year to 80-year turnover on that crop. And with the price that they're paying for property taxes, opposed to the value of that land as ag land, there's no way for them to make a profit. And so now they're selling that off as ag land, and we're losing that forestry land, and we're losing part of our forestry business. So, and not only that, this business sales tax is simply a double tax. And the money that it brings into the state is nothing compared to what it's taking from rural Minnesota in economic development. And so, that tax shouldn't be there at all. And another thing that I haven't heard here yet today is, or anything here where you would be willing to go after reducing the regulations that businesses have to come.
Slide or two down the road.
Okay, well then I'll hold off on that.
Yep.
But no, the business property tax is just, it's a real detriment to us out here.
What others think or see, or any other suggestions, ideas? Ma'am.
At the Lumberjack football fundraiser last Saturday night, I was harangued for a good 15 minutes by a local business person who said that property taxes are a challenge, and in particular in the city of Bemidji he was talking about, which I said, only 31% of your property tax bill is the city of Bemidji. But in any case, his solution was broaden the sales tax. He said, absolutely need to broaden the sales tax and reduce property taxes. And he said that is the suggestion he has, and he really was in favor of that and pushing for that.
Good. Okay. Let's move on. Regulatory issues. Is the state regulatory, is it a problem? Are there specific regulatory policies that would help? And one idea that we've heard about is would it help to have a statewide tracking system so you understood where your permit application was in the process. The DNR got it, the PCA who's taking a look at it. Would that be helpful in that area? And so I guess we'll stop again and talk about regulation. Is it cumbersome? Are there ways to improve it? Are there specific regulations in particular that you think we should take a look at? Or is it not a problem? Please.
The regulations and the permitting processes can tie businesses up for months, if not years. A lot of the expansions that you may see here will simply go away, or they won't even start because of all of the hoops they have to jump through. In fact, even your broadband and the rest of the communication system, the cost has gone up substantially just for crossing wetlands. Permitting used to be like $500, they went to $3,500. And when you have your companies expanding these communications, and they want to put them in places where we know there's low usage, there's no possible way that they can get a return on their money. That's why we're not getting the expansion up here. So the regulatory process, although it has been tried in the past to be streamlined, I don't want to use the word need because everybody uses that, but I will say if we can't get a handle on that, it's gonna continue to be an uphill battle.
And it is a perception problem that we face in our area. A company put in a wind farm, and it had been their first one in the state of Minnesota. When we first started helping them on some regulatory issues, the comment they made is, we expect this is going to be a bigger challenge than in other states, yet on the other hand, we think of ourselves as, pretty green a lot of times, or, friendly to the environment. And so we think, how do we make it easier to see alternative energy develop like that? And in fact, relative to some of our neighboring states, it's harder. The project still got done. I don't think it really changed much. It just took longer and cost more to get it. And I know a couple examples where that happens. And so I think whatever, the perception might actually be worse than the reality, but I do think it is something that we need to address. Please.
The perception is tricky. Is tricky. The perception is tricky. And part of my work that I do is working with 9 partner agencies called Minnesota Business First Stop, which is working, it's a governor's initiative, and it's working to streamline the assistance that businesses get through the state system in terms of, it's just a cobweb when you think about where to go and who to talk to. And so our partnership has a lot to do with regulatory issues. And so we have the MPCA commissioner and the DNR commissioner and other commissioners as our oversight to our group. And they're really working hard, and we're really working hard to help businesses weed through that regulatory process. Certainly there are challenges, especially with some of the mining companies and some of those businesses that have such huge projects. And but most of the permits do get permitted within that 150 days that the legislature did set up. The other thing that we're working on doing is not only on the state level, but the MPC and the DNR are working so that you can track your permits online. And that's a huge process. We're working with Minute, it's called. That's our state technology arena, and they're going to be actually hiring someone to come in and start particularly working with companies to help them through a portal. So companies can come in and go through a portal process. That's probably #1 on their priority list to get done. And they'll be starting that after the first of the year. Great. So hopefully the permitting piece will come in after that. If people are having issues with permitting, there's an avenue by which they can move forward and get answers to their questions, especially if they're complex economic development projects. So there's a start. There's a start to all this.
Yeah. I think we have to make sure that we don't just end up talking about it, but we actually turn it into projects, which sounds like it's starting to happen. That's critical, because that perception is out there, whether it's fair or not, don't matter. But if you deal and you talk to site selectors for some of these projects, that is the reality. It's kind of like the Minnesota corporate income tax is very, very high. The rate itself, but who actually pays it is a different question. There's ways to avoid that, but sometimes I'll spend a lot of time talking to a site selector about how it actually works, and they're going, too complicated. And so that perception can be a bad thing in several areas. So, okay, should we move on? We'll recap the discussion a little bit. What are your priorities? What are the most important issues for business development in this community or your community? Thinking in those areas of community investment, workforce, and business climate. Are there things that we're missing that we should think about? Are there things that we're thinking about that we shouldn't be thinking about? Are there ideas that we should take away? Anything at all? Please.
Could you expand on what do you mean by amenities other than sewer, water, broadband, roads, and infrastructure?
It's kind of a blind question, so we're looking for that feedback from people. Some people have said, yesterday in Thief River Falls, they talked about the need to expand bike trails. That was an amenity that they thought that they needed. So that could be it's a very far-ranging question. Is it daycare? It could be anything. we're not saying we've got the market cornered on the ideas. We're hoping to hear and see what they might be, but what would make a difference, or maybe it doesn't. I mean, I think it depends really on who's looking. If you're looking at somebody from out of state coming in, by and large, a lot of people will say, man, most of our communities in Minnesota, frankly, are pretty good-looking communities. Could it be better? Sure, but we do have a pretty darn nice state as well, and so maybe that's an area that we should focus somewhere else. It really depends, I think, on where you're at. Yes, please.
I'm just wondering if added to workforce, if you would want to consider a bullet that is not just about training, but it's about the pipeline, the number of people that are available in the rural area for employment as well.
We're going to need a bipartisan solution to work in Greater Minnesota, so I really appreciate the time and effort that our lawmakers made to come to this meeting and other meetings across the state as the Greater Minnesota Partnership continues to visit around communities, because it's really a lot of work that will take a lot of input from all sides. So thanks for coming to the meeting.
Thank you, and we look forward to working with you and helping you in any way that we can. And you're right about it. It needs to be a bipartisan effort. I'll give you another example of how, again, it's not a criticism, it's just we need to emulate them. There is a Hennepin County delegation that meets during the session. You've got the far left and the far right. They'll latch on to 3 or 4 issues, and they will deliver on those issues, and they're able to do that. We've had more difficulty in doing that in Greater Minnesota, and I think it's just we're not as concentrated. But that has resulted in, is there any healthcare providers in the room? Healthcare providers, they're all very heavily dependent on government reimbursement. If you look at your hospital, not every hospital in the state receives the same reimbursement. Because of the work the Hennepin County delegation does, the #1 hospital that gets reimbursed at a higher rate than anywhere else in the state is the Hennepin County Medical Center in downtown Minneapolis. They get reimbursed more than any other metropolitan hospital and more than any Greater Minnesota hospital. And so joining up on a bipartisan basis, rural legislators is going to be, I think, Senator Saxock spoke earlier about, we're losing seats because of population. It's going to be more important in the future to put those partisan labels aside and work together on common issues. So thank you for bringing that point up here. Benefits of membership. I've got to make my membership pitch here. Why the heck would you join us? Well, you help us participate in developing the partnership. Receive up-to-date information on economic development policies at the Capitol. For those of you who are familiar with the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, probably one of their strengths, one of their best strengths, is their information, both that they provide to legislators and that they provide to members. And so we will emulate that and do the same thing. Influence state policy to benefit your committee or community, and again, working together to give Greater Minnesota that strength, banding together to help ourselves. Can't do it alone, and I think we'll be much stronger together. So how do you join the partnership? Part of that package would be a membership form and application. We'd like you to fill that registration form out today. Don't care if you want to budget for it this year or next year, that's okay. Fee schedule's on the registration form. If there's any questions that you have about it, or say, hey, what category am I in, we'd be more than happy to help you. We think it's a very affordable program based on the results that we achieved last year. So we want you to join. So your help here today is an important first step. We will take some of the ideas we've heard, we'll tweak our program, and eventually what we're going to do is put this together for our board of directors to say, this is what we heard, this is what people in all over the state, there are some common themes that we need to take a look at. We'll put those together. So together we can make this a better place to live and work and help our local economies. So we really encourage you to join the partnership. Our contact information is up there. We'll be around for a while too, and happy to visit with you individually. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your morning. Sad to see Phil go. He was going to lead us in the rouser for the Gopher fans, but apparently we'll do that later. So Dave said he was going to do that. What's that?
I said, give me those tickets back.
Yeah, there you go. Gave them early. All right, thank you everybody. Really appreciate your time.